architects are designing more for other architects in the constituency they're meant to serve.
Why do you think boutique architecture firms are struggling to survive?
One is not many firms think about what the notion of practice is. They just fight the fire of the moment and they really don't think. Education's obligation is to the discipline, not to the profession, not to produce employable architects. If I don't have people who can think independently, I can't differentiate myself. If I can't differentiate myself, I become like any other practice. If I become like any other practice, my only competitive edge is by reducing fees.
What do you mean by hygiene in business?
Hygiene means just looking at the financials, making sure your costs are under control. You need to do a monthly review saying, okay, what are my projections on my projects for the next 6 months?
Today I have Mr. Prem Chandavarkar with us on the podcast. A highly accomplished architect with over 40 years of experience, Prem is the managing partner of CNT Architects, Bangalore. His expertise lies in a wide range of fields including architecture, urbanism, philosophy, and cultural studies. His career has included working for renowned firms such as Jordan Michel and Tanvinde Rayan Chaudhary. He is also a respected figure in the architectural community, known for his thought-provoking writings. Today, we will be talking to him about the changing landscape of the profession, education, business, practice, and many more intriguing topics for all architectural professionals. So, let's get started.
Hello, sir. A very warm welcome to our podcast.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
You have been practicing architecture for over 3 decades now. What has changed in the industry in these 30 years?
A lot has changed. I mean, the internet has happened.
Oh,
Social media has happened. So the digital revolution has happened. So there's a huge change. And the influences that people have changed. So earlier, there was a process of negotiation with a client or discussion with a client, a sort of joint discovery of what you all were trying to do in the project. Right now, many clients come with pre-influenced ideas because of the imagery they've seen. They've seen very loaded, provocative imagery of architecture coming from all over the world. The speed with which projects happens has I mean, things happen much faster than they used to happen 30 years ago. Clients are more demanding. Your accountability is per project. You have to perform on every project. Earlier, clients were willing to invest in relationships. I'm not saying that has not gone away, but it's not what it used to be.
okay.
And I think even architects entering the profession are so influenced by so much that they see they are unable to construct a sense of their own self and identity. So that is also a struggle.
Okay. Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's like there's an interesting essay by the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard called The Ecstasy of Communication. And he says the nature of alienation has changed. Earlier, it was characterized by distance and isolation. But now it is characterized by an overwhelming proximity to everything. There's no such thing as distance. What's happening on the other side of the earth, you can see in real time.
That's right.
And reflection, which needs the construction of solitude, the construction of distance, which came as a way of life earlier, is harder to achieve now. So people just become like switching centers to a network of influences, and the notion of slowly building up your own identity as a person does not happen unless you make the deliberate effort to do so. And unfortunately, our training does not empower that. Our training tends to treat, especially in India, students as empty vessels who are to be filled with the knowledge of architecture. and not people who have to have an inner spark through which they construct their sense of self. So that has changed a great deal.
Right. So what should an upcoming firm do differently? What you did 30 years ago?
One focus on what specific, this I think we were doing from the beginning, but focus on the value you have to offer. There's something unique to you. And so you have to focus on that. And you have to differentiate yourself from other practices. You can't just be any ordinary practice. And that's going to get more and more challenging in the age of AI, where there are a lot of architects who survive because they are the only channel through which the technical ability to put a design together and construct it can happen. And AI is going to take over a lot of that. So you have to focus on the value addition. So I think that is a challenging thing, but I think eventually it all boils down to what your inner passion is and what unique value you are offering. And unless you can do that, it's going to be very difficult to survive. You have to carve out a unique space for yourself.
And how do you suggest youngsters find their passion and find their values?
Follow their heart. It's not a hard thing to do. So you just follow your heart, you practice rigorously, you reflect rigorously. There's a lot of rigor that's required in it, your quest, whether it is sketching or reading or traveling or whatever it is. You have to pursue what the world is around you. You have to be enchanted by the world around you and sort of investigate it rigorously. And then you find things in the world that echo with what is inside you in your heart, within your heart, and you have to pursue that. It's a patient and rigorous search. It's not something that happens instantly, but it's something you need to do.
Okay. And we see a lot of boutique architecture firms. Like, I'm talking about the younger strata right now. I'm not talking about the firms who have already established, right? So why do you think boutique architecture firms are struggling to survive these days?
One is not many firms think about what the notion of practice is. And architects generally tend to make poor practice managers because their original management exposure is on projects. And projects are task oriented. You need to look at how do you do things. Or, what do you do? What do you do next? So it's task. Practice requires process orientation. You say, how are things done? And beyond that, you need a sense of purpose, which is why am I here? So many architects get stuck in the what and they don't graduate to the how and the why. And that becomes a constraint of growth. So because you can carve out your unique space only through the how and why. And otherwise you're treated as a commodity and then you're buffeted around by market forces and other pressures.
Okay. And this rolls back to what you had said earlier. How do you find the values and how do you stay relevant?
Yes. Because clients are going to trust you only once they sense that there's a sense of inner purpose that demands a standard that is higher than what they might ask of you, what they can ask of you. So you need to invest in that. And you'll find the clients who trust you and come back to you project on project are the ones who have found that in you. That's why they trust you. This is apart from the fact that you need to look at, reliability of service delivery. I mean, those are givens here. You have to resolve those. You have to have a very clear idea of project process and how it happens. That's also failure in many architecture firms. They just fight the fire of the moment and they really don't think.
Hmm.
So I think that is necessary if you want to grow, if you want to sustain or to grow your practice.
But what does the struggle have to do with the declining popularity of architect practice, like education and practice?
I don't know if architecture is declining. I think those who offer value in their architecture
Hmm.
are still, that is still recognized. I think the problem is you don't think of what that value should be and what you're going to offer to the client. And one problem is that value is intangible.
Hmm.
If you ask the manager of a large industrial corporation where the last 10 years successful, it's likely that person would turn to their balance sheet, their profit and loss statement, and quantitative indicators.
Hmm.
If you ask an architect, even though the architect, for the sake of their practice, needs to maintain a balance sheet and profit and loss account, etc., an architect who's passionate about design probably would not look at those indicators to judge their success. They would think, what are the buildings I've done? Are they good? Are they bad? And judge it that way. Now, and that's a very intangible bottom line. And the problem with an intangible bottom line is that you need social validation for it.
Hmm.
And the problem that has happened with most of the profession is that social validation tends to turn inwards toward peer review. So architects judge their work about, design awards won, competitions won, publication in reputed journals or books, invitations to the lecture circuit, how seriously their work is discussed in schools of architecture, things like that. And these are all valid goals to have, but when they become the dominant goals, it builds a self-referential culture where architects are designing more for other architects in the constituency they're meant to serve.
Well,
So you got to go beyond that. I'm not saying you reject all those, the pursuit of those goals, but you got to go beyond that and look at how you are adding value to your, in through the projects you make, through the people who inhabit those projects.
okay.
So you once you start thinking that way, you think very differently. You don't think that a good building is one where people look and say, wow, a good building is really one where they can inhabit it for, say, 5 years and look back at those years with affection. So you start looking at patterns of inhabitation and how you can structure space, facilitate and catalyze positive, potential of inhabitation, and that how that inhabitation breeds memory, because eventually, your inhabitation of a space, the memories of that inhabitation start getting into the grain of that space, and that's what makes you value that space. So you have to start designing from that point of view, and you find that your design choices become very different if you start thinking that way. So, for example, if I'm designing a house, a private house, I will start thinking of verandas and bay windows and niches and bookshelves and other tectonic elements that are sticky to memory. So I think those are the things you need to start thinking of, and then people find value in your building, and that's what makes your practice sustainable. There's a lot of suspicion of star architects who are lauded in journals, who win awards, but people hate their buildings.
Okay. What is your take on this notion of star architects?
Actually, what I have been interested, or we have been interested in our practices going beyond the notion of the personality.
Okay.
Although practice is the primary means by which architecture happens, it's a poorly conceptualized notion. And while there has been a fair amount of academic research on this question, in the mainstream, there are two anecdotal models that dominate.
Hmm.
One is a practice as a business organization. And we see a lot of practices that are that way. But the other, which is seen as the cutting edge of the profession, is the personality-centric practice. If you ask, what's the cutting edge of architecture, you tend to name individuals. Name
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
And there is no doubt that the personality-centric model has created some absolutely wonderful works of architecture. I don't question that at the moment. But I think both models have not been sufficient for the profession. The business organization model, of course, is structured to look more at business than at architecture. And the personality-centric model has bred a culture of heroes and imitators rather than a widespread rigor of creative reflection
Hmm.
and personal mastery. So actually, our interest has been: can we make a practice that is design centric without being personality centric?
Hmm. Right. And this is how the practice stays relevant over years and years, right?
Yes, and how it survives across generations. Right?
Hmm. Right. I would like to know your opinion on this. Do you think that the notion of star architect creates silos in the industry because youngsters only look up to design and they forget the principles that are required to build a sustainable practice?
Yeah, and because you get into it, it creates a culture of imitation amongst those who are not the stars.
Hmm.
It starts prioritizing the question of style. That's problematic because style should be a byproduct of the effort to do something meaningful rather than a predetermined solution by which meaning can be affixed.
Hmm.
And so it tends to take us in the wrong direction.
Okay. So, why are most firms unable to grow from a boutique office to a multi-city or a multinational company?
Growth is challenging because design is a very hands-on process.
Hmm.
Deals with intangibles. And, I read a saying once that the day a carpenter hires his fifth helper, he must lay down his own tools. So you have to be willing to do that, step away from that hands-on process. That is why something like 80 to 90% of practices all over the world are less than 20 people.
Hmm.
Because beyond that, it's difficult to manage it. Yeah, because if people are passionate about design, they want to stay involved with it. They don't want to become managers of design. They want to be designers themselves. So that presents a challenge to growth. It's different if you are growing on the basis of some skill, like you're known for a firm that does hospitals, or you're known for a firm that has a very reliable project delivery on large and high cost projects. That's different, and there you're using skills of leverage where one person can manage huge teams of people, but the person at the top is more of a manager than a hands-on designer.
Hmm.
If you want to be a hands-on designer, you have to you wind up limiting the size of your practice. So the model we have followed is actually to have multiple teams, each team being quite small and autonomous. And the energy of the firm comes from the exchange of ideas and brainstorming across teams.
Okay.
And there is also a strong culture of reflection and research that cuts across teams.
Okay. But I would like to go back into the root of this problem, only a design approach that architects have. And I think this is ingrained in us when we are studying architecture in colleges. Like you said, everyone wants to be designers. And if after experience people are managing teams, they are more of managers. right? And we see small practice segmented all across the world. So do you think that this has something to do with the education that we receive?
Part of it has to do with education. I don't know if I would put all the cause on education. Part of it needs to be looked at as just reflection within the profession itself. And the reason I wouldn't like to blame education is I think education should just be concerned with education and not with practice. The goal of education is not to produce employable architects. Education's obligation is to the discipline, not to the profession.
Mm.
And the goal should be to produce creative, independent designers. And that's beneficial to practice also, because speaking just as a practitioner, not as an academic, I would say that I am equipped to cover gaps in technical skills. If a fresher out of architecture school doesn't know enough about construction or how to put a working drawing together,
Mm.
I just apprentice that person to a senior architect. And if that person is willing to learn and is open to learning and is willing to work hard, within 6 months or 8 months, they're up to speed. And it's easy to do that. But as a practitioner, I'm not equipped to cover gaps in creative skills or gaps in thinking skills.
Mm.
I need the education system to offer that to me. Because if I don't have people who can think independently, I can't differentiate myself. If I can't differentiate myself, I become like any other practice.
Right.
If I become like any other practice, my only competitive edge is by reducing fees. And that's why we have the culture of low fees and undercutting each other in the profession. I think blaming clients and blaming capitalism is an easy cop-out. We need to internally reflect within the profession on that. So, so I think within, we practice architecture without really thinking about what practice is. I think we need a certain degree of self-reflection and self-critique on what our practice is.
Mm.
And without that, we're not going to grow both creatively or in terms of size of practice. We're not going to be able to do that. So, and we'll be forced into more and more unsustainable modes of practice.
Right.
So I think we have to look within as a profession. Yes, there are problems we face in the world outside, but I think the greater problem is within us.
Right. So I was recently talking to Mr. Dwaipan Chakravarti, sir. So he pointed out one very interesting thing, that we as architects would like to put ourselves on a higher pedestal. But in the total calculation and in the total ecosystem, we are only this much. So why do we want to put ourselves on pedestal?
I don't think, looking at from the viewpoint saying that we are just one small cog in the wheel of the whole machine is the right way to look at it. We might be a small part of it, but we can be a hugely influential part of it.
We are. That
Yeah.
is more debatable.
Yeah. So, the problem is putting ourselves on a pedestal, because that's another word for saying our ego takes.
Yes, yes.
And when I said clients trust you because once they sense that you're driven by an internal standard that's higher than what they could possibly demand of you, they won't trust you if they sense that's coming from ego, because no one's going to trust an egotistic person.
Right.
They're going to trust you only if you are captivated by something greater than you are. So you have to be caught up in the wonder of the world and be pursuing that. And and that's what's going to build your position, your influence, the sustainability of your practice.
Mm.
I did a house for a client many years ago. This must have been more than 25 years ago. And it was a client who had recently become wealthy, and they were building larger house than what they were used to. And she was quite nervous about it, especially once the construction had started. And she said, have I committed to something that, that's going to be the wrong decision? And after the house was completed, she told me that what gave her comfort was when the site meetings were there. And she said she saw me get out of the car and look at the house, and this sort of goofy expression would come over my face.
Okay.
And she felt very reassured by that, because she sensed I was captivated by the house more than just offering us, as a service to her. So there was something larger in the air there. So I think that's what you need to pursue if you want to make a difference, or feel. I wouldn't make the difference, might be too strong a word, but feel that you're making a worthwhile contribution.
So, new practices that are coming in, they are competing a lot, as we discussed. So, do you think that limited scope of work that architects choose to do could be a problem for these practices?
No,
No. Okay.
I don't think. I think if whatever you choose to do it captivated by something greater than you are, you choose to pursue it with rigor, and you choose to actually add value in what you do, so that design is not just a problem-solving activity, it's a propositional activity that offers propositions on what the value of life is.
Mm.
And I think if you do that, your value will be recognized.
But is it still relevant in the modern world? I mean, there is so much competition.
It's even more relevant because the distractions are so huge, the pressures are so huge, that the search for what is meaningful has become more and more difficult.
Hmm.
And if you can be of assistance in the search for meaning, and given that architecture shapes how we live, I think it plays an important role in the search for meaning. And if you can seek to create an architecture that offers that aura of something meaningful, and it doesn't matter what kind of a project it may be. I think if you do that, you will be recognized.
When we started the interview, you had started with a point where you said the clients have become more and more demanding these days.
Mm.
What did you mean by that?
They're in a greater hurry. They are subject to many more influences.
Right.
So handling them is more complex. But I think if you can anchor it and show that you're not also buffeted by the forces of the world, you are anchored in something that is primordial and something that is meaningful.
Oh.
They will in their hearts, they might not acknowledge it openly, but they will in their hearts recognize it and grant you the space.
And what scope do you think multidisciplinary firms have today?
I don't think there's a formulaic answer to that. It depends on what you want to do.
Yes.
For example, we many years ago, 20 years, close to 20 years ago, we were also offering project management as part of the team, construction management part of the team.
Oh.
And we got out of that because we realized that that's not who we were. That although construction management and design both have to do with buildings, the skills involved in each are different, very different.
Wow.
And our passion, our core passion, our core competence was design, not this. And if we try to do both, we're not doing justice to either. But having said that, I can accept that there might be someone who's just very interested in, in the way of they find, because managing projects is also an art form.
Mm.
And they're very interested, and what really interests them is this way they weave multiple inputs into a project to make a successful deal. So there can be people who are interested in that.
Mm.
It's not us. So we have focused on just being an architecture firm. But there could be people who enjoy putting a multidisciplinary practice together.
And if young firms are looking to do that, how can they create a multidisciplinary?
I'd say they should first come to terms with who they are and what is in their heart before they tackle that question. And I think that will answer the question. There's this book called Letters to a Young Poet by a famous Austrian poet called Rainer Maria Rilke. And it's about letters of advice he writes to this young poet. And only his letters are in the book, not the poet letters he receives from the young poet. But one of them, the poet has clearly asked the question, how do I write? And Rilke tells him, you're asking the wrong question. You must first ask, must I write?
Mm.
And if in your heart you answer, I must, the how will resolve it.
Right.
You just need to persist with the rigor of writing. And he suggests you shouldn't be trying to leave the answers, you should be leaving the questions. There's always a tension of being in a certain stage of the unknown, and you need to enjoy being in that state.
Mhm.
And that is actually the creative state.
Okay.
The Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki said, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, only a few. So one needs to retain that childlike curiosity and wonder.
So, what roles do collaboration and marketing have to play in a firm's growth?
Collaboration is very key to the idea of what we do in our practice. Because as I said, we look at a practice that is seeks to be design-centric without being personality-centric.
Mm.
So if you're looking in your heart and you're trying to find something, it's through collaboration you validate what is in your heart. Because if you see in the echo in someone else's heart, then you realize you are doing something that is of value.
Mm.
And that collaboration is not confined to the firm. We want to have these kind of discussions with clients. We looked at the idea of co-creation of value. So, collaboration is core to
Mm.
what we do.
Marketing?
Marketing, we have not had to, yes, we do some marketing, but 70% of our work, I think, to 80% has come from either repeat work from clients or referral from existing clients or people who have just heard of us. Thankfully, in India, which is still a growing economy, may not be growing as much as we would like it to be, but growing faster than most parts of the world.
Mm.
And there's still a shortage of architects. If you look at the ratio of architects to population, there's still a shortage. The distribution is perhaps wrong. They all tend to be concentrated in the metropolitan cities, but there is still a shortage of overall. So it's not like many parts of the developed world where really there's a surplus of architects and marketing is core to your survival.
Mm.
I don't think, yes, we do some marketing, but it's not been such a make or break issue.
And for the younger firms,
And I read a book on marketing, architectural practice, long time back. And the guy said 20% depends on how you sell,
mm,
10% depends on when you sell,
okay.
but 70% depends on what you are selling. So you have to concentrate. So that is why this notion of coming to terms with who you are, what is in your heart is crucial. So you need to have a unique message.
Mm.
You can't just say, I'm an architect, I do pretty work, I'll provide you what you want and expect that to sustain. You have to have a message of value. They have to see the light in your eyes to trust you. So internal quest is not an idealistic thing, it's good business practice also.
Um,
I think a mistake we make in thinking that there is a conflict between idealism and business practice. What you need to do is you need to first have a foundation of idealism and build your business pragmatism on that. It's not an either or choice.
but what I see in many things, I am a designer. I will like I have this USP and this is what I and everything like that. It's not everyone starts well off, right? But as and when they they start a practice, and then the idea of lack of knowledge of business kicks in. And this is when most of the firms they find themselves in that cogwheel, that the survival cogwheel. I think.
See, there's a writer who used to teach at Harvard Business School.
Hmm.
David Maister was his name.
Okay.
And he specialized on professional service firms. Was professor at business school, focused on large corporations. But he looked at architects, doctors, lawyers, people like that. And he talked about two factors that affect the well-being of your practice. And he sort of equated it to metaphors of well-being in life. One he called hygiene and one he called health. So just if you want to be well in life, there are some hygiene factors like, being clean and things like that. And then there are health factors like exercising, eating well, the right food, etc. And it's health that affects 90% of your well-being. And health also has, increasing possibilities. Hygiene, there's a limit. Okay?
Yeah.
Beyond a point of certain basic rules of being clean, then there are diminishing returns, trying to be clean. So you can't get obsessive about it. And therefore, he says it all comes down to passion and principles in the success of professional practice. The problem is when you talk about the business of practice, we tend to talk about the hygiene factors. Now, this is not to say you can't neglect the hygiene.
What do you mean by hygiene in business?
Hygiene means just looking at the financials, making sure things are okay, making sure your costs are under control.
Hmm.
So you need to do a monthly review saying, okay, what are my projections on my projects for the next 6 months? Will they sustain the practice? Keep doing that every month. Making sure you're invoicing on time, that you've not gone way past the stage of your project and just late in raising the invoice.
Hmm.
A lot of architects don't do that, and therefore there's a lot of unbilled work.
Yeah.
Work that they've done, but they're just not invoiced for. And then they complain about the cash flow struggles. So if you've got enough work and you follow these basic hygiene factors and make them a matter of habit, not something that needs to sort of preoccupy your attention,
Right.
then you should do okay.
Hmm. But then 30% hygiene and 70% health
Yeah.
would be a good balance.
I mean, one could debate the ratio, but there's no doubt that health is the dominant one, and you need to pay attention to that.
Hmm.
And the problem is we tend to see the hygiene things are tangible tasks. You can say, "Oh, I must do this right away."
Hmm.
The health things are not so tangible, and they're much more long term. So we either don't sustain the rigor or we don't pay enough attention. So because something is tangible, it grabs our attention. And this is where the distraction happens.
Right. Nicely put. So we were talking about marketing, right? And there are a lot of marketing firms that are emerging for architecture and interior design practice. So what is your take on these type of firms that are evolving to service architects and interior design?
Um, I would find firms like that useful for lead generation. There might be organizations who could use your service that you're not aware of. So to make that initial introduction.
Okay.
But once that introduction is made, I think you need to do the marketing yourself. You can't outsource that. As I said, people have to trust you by seeing the light in your eyes.
Hmm.
And for that, you need the tangibility of presence to be able to do that. And can't outsource that. So they could be useful, but I think there's a limit.
Hmm. I'm just curious to know, you have said that there should be a light in your eyes and people should trust you.
Hmm.
How is it possible for a firm like yours, which is already, you have been working for almost 60 years now. So for every single client to see that spark in the eyes, I mean, not everyone is meeting the top end of the firm, right?
No. So you have to run a culture that promotes everyone having that spark in their eyes. You have to select people who you feel have that potential, even if it's not evident. And you have to run a firm that people enjoy being in, where you're stimulating them, and you're also granting them a certain degree of autonomy to follow their passions. So you have to, that has to be tied to the way you run the firm. So it's not a top-down control firm where people are just to feel like cogs in the machine. So you have to run it that way, and you have to preach certain things in the culture. Like ours is a legacy practice. It was not created by me. There's a previous generation. And there were certain cultural things that you were taught by the previous generation that I think are extremely important. And there are small things that make a huge difference. So, for example, we are told when presenting a design, don't say I think, say don't you think. You say I think, it becomes your possession. If you say don't you think, you're immediately talking about something that's greater than both you and the client.
Right.
You're taught to always respect people and never talk down to the client like you are the expert and the client is. Many architects, I think, make the mistake of having contempt for their clients, even if they don't express.
And I think it's vice versa also. So I see a lot of youngsters putting the client on the pedestal, like whatever you say will do.
I don't think they put the client on the pedestal because they revere the person. I think they're putting the client's power on the pedestal. Client.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference there. But that respect is not going to work unless it goes all the way down. So other things we are told is we are taught as part of my training in my younger years was if you go for a meeting in a client's office, thank the receptionist and the chowkidar also when you go out. You see the way more many people in India behave in meetings, and you sit around a table and then someone comes and serves coffee or tea. They act as though that cup of coffee just appeared by magic. Acknowledge the human who has placed that coffee in front of you and say thank you. Just smile and say thank you. So these are small things which make a big difference, not only in the impact that they make, but once you believe them to be important, they change you as a person. And it's a way of keeping control of your ego and realizing you're part of a greater world that that grants you survival. So and grants you survival, grants you potential. There's a wonderful story about a Japanese potter called Shoji Hamada, and he had two kilns. One was small and one was huge. And he made a commitment to himself that he'll never put more than 50% of his work in one kiln. He had to use both in one of those kilns. He had to use both. And the large kiln was so huge that he couldn't produce enough work to justify firing it. So he used to collaborate with other potters in the area, and they used to fire their work together. And once he was asked why he did this, and he said, if I only had a small kiln, I would treat pottery as my possession. The large kiln forces me to realize that pottery is something greater than me, and I survive by its grace. So I think that's the attitude you need to treat within yourself. And I strongly believe that's core to the human condition. We get distracted by money or fame or other things. It doesn't really lead you to fulfillment.
And credit.
Yeah. And it's not, as I said, once you do that, you realize people trust you for that. So it's not contrary to good businesses. So as long as you're maintaining the hygiene of running a systematic business, this has to be the core that sustains.
What a valuable lesson. The younger generations. Okay. So, in your experience of running a successful architecture business, which administrative systems and organizational practices have proved to be the most important?
I don't know if I'd really put it down to any one system of practice. I think I've already said what I have to say.
Hygiene and
So,
health. Yes.
Hygiene and health, for just have a certain discipline of the hygiene, but turn your core attention to health and do it with a certain rigor.
Okay.
And be yourself. Don't try to be somebody else.
But not everyone can be their self and be successful, right? I mean, not everyone has that.
I think the problem is that people think that, and then they aren't themselves, and then they're not differentiated. If you're not yourself, you're a commodity.
Yeah.
And commodities get, in economics 101, they'll teach you that commodities get differentiated only by price. And then you're subject to all those pressures in the world. So the only way to carve out your own space is to be yourself. And the thing is, every one of us is unique. A person exactly like you has never existed in history before and will never exist in history. And that's a pretty mind-boggling thing. So what each of us has is a unique voice. And if we can translate something that is universal and transcendental through our unique voice, it's a way of, making the sacred be reborn every day. If the sacred was something very visible, it would become mundane. It requires that effort of translation. There's a very interesting essay by Joseph Wickworth who suggests that we view design as an act of translation. And he says we have two languages. We have the language of design process, and that deploys a vocabulary of drawings, sketches, ideas, computer simulations, models, etc. And then on the other hand is the language of spatial experience, spatial inhabitation. And that is sensory, it's embodied consciousness, it plays out over time. So its vocabulary is very different.
Hmm.
So he says design is actually an act of translation from the language of design process to the language of spatial experience. But then he makes an interesting point. He says, in translation, you need far greater fluency in the language you're translating into than the language you're translating from. If I'm translating a poem from English into Hindi, I need enough English to understand and appreciate the poem with all its nuance.
Mm.
But I need to be a masterful poet in Hindi.
Right.
And architects make the wrong choice. They focus all their fluency in, developing their fluency in design process. How do you discover the fluency in experience, in spatial experience? So what I'm basically saying is before you're an architect, you're a human being, and you have to come to terms with what that is before you seek to be an architect. We tend to look too much at everything within the professional lens.
Right. Wow. Completely respect that. So, what would be your suggestion to new architects? What should architects do differently over the next decade?
They need to respond to change, but there has to be a core that you don't focus on just doing things differently because of the time you're living in. There has to be a core that sustains. There are thousands of years of evolution that have shaped us,
Mm.
and we can't escape that. So there's a core that sustains. We are moved by certain things. Just think of what are the things that make life worthwhile. It is love, joy, wonder, curiosity, reverence, etc.
Mm.
And those things never change. And how can architecture offer those things? That's not going to change.
Mm.
Yes, the technology of the time is different. You need to adjust to that.
Mm.
But so don't just focus on change, focus on also what is constant. There's a biologist called Umberto Maturana who said history, and he's looking at biology to learn this lesson. He said history is a process of transformation through conservation.
History is a process of transformation through conservation.
Yeah. That is, you transform to new times by sustaining what is at the core, by conserving what is.
Right.
And he says that's the principle of life.
So, since you touched upon that technology and you said that, of course, we need to have some core values, but we need to transform ourselves as per technology. What do you think? What role does AI has to play in future? In architecture, of course.
AI makes my whole argument a whole lot more important.
Okay.
That you focus on what's in your heart, focus on how thousands of years of evolution have shaped you, focus on what is constant and core and primordial about the human condition. Because too many architects have just survived just on the technical ability of being able to put a design together and build it. And that mere technical ability will be increasingly taken over by AI. So where you can make a difference is in the primordial value of the human condition. And AI cannot do that. And that's something known through experience. I just mentioned all the valuable things in life are things like love, joy, wonder, reverence, humor, mastery, etc. These are things you'd be hard-pressed to define, but you know them as tangible reality when you experience them. So it is real. It's not just something abstract.
Right.
And if you pursue that with rigor, you discover more and more.
Right.
So I think that's what we need to focus on, and we need to turn our attention to. Otherwise, if we don't do that, we're going to be displaced by AI.
Right. I have learned so many things today. Anchoring yourself, finding the values, hygiene and health, like the balance between hygiene and health, and how to tackle AI also. Somehow I have learned that.
See, the thing is that the people tend to think, your own sense of love, joy, reverence, etc., is subjective, and it's not. But actually, in my opinion, the most objective thing.
Mm.
Uh, Take an example like humor. You would not be able to define it, but you can have 200 people of varied backgrounds in a cinema hall watching a comedy film. And if there's a good joke, all 200 laugh at the same time. So I think those primordial things through a process of communion that's hard to define or describe, but they happen. And I think that's what we need to focus.
Such a valuable lesson. And I actually had only those many questions for you today, but I hope we can connect once again.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you found Converse valuable, you can subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Also, please share your reviews on the show and the topics of discussions through comments. Let us know if you found anything interesting in particular. You can find all past episodes and know more about us on Insyd.ai. See you in the next episode.